Here's a question worth sitting with for a moment. It is October 1955, and you are at the Earl's Court Motor Show in London. On your left is the brand new Citroën DS, a car so radical that the crowd genuinely cannot believe it is real. On your right, the MGA has just made its world debut, the shape of British sports car legend being written in real time. Behind you, somebody is blocking the aisle to stare at the new Jaguar 2.4. And tucked into a corner of the Roots Group stand, looking for all the world like a small American Grand Tourer, is something called the Sunbeam Rapier. Now, be honest with yourself. Which one do you remember? That is precisely the dilemma at the heart of this story. Between 1955 and 1967, the Sunbeam Rapier, across 5 distinct series, found its way into tens of thousands of British and export driveways. Real people bought it, drove it hard, rallied it, toured Europe in it, and in many cases kept it for years. It was a proper, usable motor car with genuine competition credentials, a stylish hardtop body that turned heads, and a price that sat within reach of the ambitious working professional. Yet today, mention the Sunbeam Rapier in any classic car gathering, and you will see a flicker of recognition followed by something dangerously close to a shrug. Mention the MG, and the room lights up. Why did that happen? How does a car that sold in those numbers with 5 Monte Carlo finishes, class wins at the Mille Miglia, and a genuine rack rally outright victory to its name, end up as the quiz answer nobody gets? That is what we are going to find out, and we are going to do it properly, with the real numbers, the real history, and the respect this car deserves. Britain in 1955 was a country still shaking off the last effects of post-war austerity. Petrol rationing had only ended the previous year. The Festival of Britain had tried to remind people that the future could be bright, and slowly, cautiously, it was beginning to feel that way. A man in a steady job, a salesman, an engineer, a teacher with a bit saved up might now consider, for the first time in a decade, spending real money on something beyond bare necessity. Something with a bit of dash. Something that said he had arrived. Into that moment came the Sunbeam Rapier. And it was absolutely right for its time. Section 1. A car born from a parts bin and a lowy dream. To understand the Rapier, you need to understand the Roots Group. By the mid-1950s, Roots had built a respectable family of cars: Hillman, Humber, Singer, Sunbeam, each brand occupying a different rung on the British motoring ladder. The new Hillman Minx was solid, reliable, and utterly without glamour. It was the car a sensible man bought. What Roots needed was a car. A man with taste bought something that shared the same sensible bones, but wore an altogether different coat. They called their new platform the Audax range. The Rapier was the first car off that platform, arriving several months ahead of its Hillman Minx and Singer Gazelle cousins, and it arrived in quite spectacular fashion. The body was a 2-door pillarless hardtop, no B-pillar between the front and rear windows, giving it a wide, open, airy greenhouse that was genuinely distinctive on British roads in 1955. The styling drew clear inspiration via a consulting arrangement with Raymond Loewy's design organization from the Studebaker coupes of 1953. In fact, some observers at Earl's Court that October described it as a miniature Studebaker, and they were not entirely wrong. The two-tone paintwork, the chrome side flash, the panoramic rear window, all of it carried that slightly exotic, transatlantic flavor that British buyers found irresistible. But here is where Roots showed their practical intelligence. The Rapier bodies were built by pressed steel at Cowley, shipped to Thrupp and Maberley in North London for painting and trimming, then transported again to the Roots assembly plant at Ryton-on-Dunsmore near Coventry for the mechanical fitting. It was a complicated production process, but it meant Roots could offer a genuinely premium product without building an entirely new factory. Under the bonnet sat the 1,390 cubic centimeter overhead valve, 4-cylinder engine, inherited from the Hillman Minx, but with meaningful improvements. The compression ratio was raised to 8:1, the inlet and exhaust manifolds were revised, and a Stromberg carburetor replaced the standard unit. The result was 62.5 brake horsepower at 5,000 revolutions per minute, not earth-shattering, but sufficient to propel the car to 86 miles per hour in a class where most buyers were not chasing outright speed. Standard equipment included Laycock de Normanville overdrive, leather upholstery, and a steering column gear change, the last of those being a nod to the American influence on the car's character. When it went on sale, the Series 1 Rapier carried a price of £1,043.17, including purchase tax that was March 1957. For context, that bought you a fully equipped touring coupe with genuine premium touches, at a price below a Jaguar, below an Austin Healey, and not dramatically above the basic Hillman. Roots had threaded a very clever needle. 7,477 Series the first Rapiers were built, before the model gave way to the Series 2 in 1958. By any measure, the car had proved its market. Section 2, the Rally Master, Series 2, and the competition years. If the Series I established the Rapier's character, the Series 2 defined its reputation. Announced on the 6th of February, 1958, it arrived having already been tested in the most demanding laboratory available, international rallying. Peter Harper, Roots' lead competition driver, had finished 5th overall in the 1958 Monte Carlo Rally in a works-prepared Series 1. That result was significant, not just as a result, but as a development brief. The changes incorporated into the Series 2 reflected exactly what Harper and his co-driver had learned on those alpine stages. The engine was enlarged to 1,494 cubic centimeters, with a raised compression ratio of 8.5 to 1, larger inlet and exhaust valves, and twin Zenith carburetors. Output rose to 73 brake horsepower, and the unit was known internally at Roots as the Rally Master, which tells you everything about where their priorities lay. The column gear change was replaced by a proper floor-mounted lever, a change developed directly on the works rally cars. Steering received a more precise recirculating ball box, and the front brakes were enlarged. Roots knew how to launch a car. They arranged for 9 of the new Series 2 Rapiers to be waiting in Monte Carlo for the international press, to be driven immediately after that year's rally finished. It was sharp marketing that spoke directly to the car's sporting credentials. The Series 2 also introduced the convertible variant, a proper, fully open car that added another dimension to the range. The hardtop coupe carried the same price as the Series I had, £1,043.17. The convertible cost £60 more, at £1,103.17. Overdrive was now an optional extra, rather than standard, adding another £63.15 if you wanted it. 15,151 Series 2 Rapiers were built across the hardtop and convertible variants, already well ahead of the Series I pace. The rally results kept coming. 1958 saw Peter Harper win the RAC Rally outright, in a Rapier, not class, not category, outright. The Alpine Rally that same year produced first place in the 1,600 cubic centimeter special touring class, a Coupe des Alpes, and 6th place overall. In 1959, the Rapier finished 5th overall at Monte Carlo for the second consecutive year, took 3rd overall at the Alpine Rally, and 1st in class, won its class at the Liège-Rome-Liège, and added a 3rd at the Acropolis. In 1960, it was 4th overall at Monte Carlo, and 1st in class, then 3rd overall and 1st in class at the Acropolis again. These were not token manufacturer entries padding out a result sheet. These were genuinely competitive finishes against proper opposition. The Rapier was a works rally car that happened to be available in showrooms, and that was exactly how Roots wanted it understood. Section 3. The Sweet Spot, Series 3 and 3IA, 1959 to 1963. Ask any Sunbeam Rapier enthusiast which car they would want in their garage, and the answer is almost always the same: the Series 3. Introduced in September 1959, this is the car that most observers consider the definitive Rapier, the moment when all the development work, the rally feedback, and the engineering refinement combined into something genuinely harmonious. The engine remained at 1,494 cubic centimeters, but it was substantially improved by a new 8-port aluminium cylinder head with a higher compression ratio and redesigned valves, plus a new, sportier camshaft. Twin Zenith carburetors were retained but repositioned on a water-heated inlet manifold. Output rose to 78 brake horsepower at 5,400 revolutions per minute. Gearbox ratios were reconfigured higher second, third, and top, and the gear lever movement was shortened for snappier changes. Perhaps most significantly for drivers, the Series 3 received front disc brakes. Combined with a widened front track, the car handled measurably better than its predecessors. According to Autocar's contemporary road test, the Series 3 achieved a top speed of 93 miles per hour and reached 60 miles per hour from rest in 16.5 seconds, a genuine improvement on the Series 2 figures. The interior had been carefully refined as well. The scuttle line was lowered and the A-pillars were made slimmer, giving the driver 20% more windscreen area, a change that sounds subtle but dramatically improved the sense of visibility in space. Deep pile carpets became standard. A burr walnut veneer dashboard with Jaguar-style black-faced instrumentation replaced the earlier fascia. The seats were redesigned. 15,368 Series 3 Rapiers were built. The Series 3 EA, announced in 1961, took the same body and refined the mechanical package further. Engine capacity rose to 1,592 cubic centimeters, using the unit developed alongside the Sunbeam Alpine sports car. A stiffer crankshaft with larger connecting rod bearings significantly improved long-term durability, a direct response to competition experience. Power increased to just over 80 brake horsepower, and torque climbed to 88 pounds-foot at 3,900 revolutions per minute. An increased diameter front anti-roll bar brought worthwhile improvements in cornering behavior. Inside, a fresh air heater became standard equipment. Previously, it had been a cost option. The Series 3 IA also continued the competition program, adding first-in-class honors at the East African Safari in 1961, fastest lap on the Monaco circuit in the same year's Monte Carlo Rally, and first-in-class at the Acropolis Rally in 1960. 17,354 Series 3 EA Rapiers were built, the largest production run of any individual Rapier series. If volume alone determined reputation, that figure would tell a different story. Section 4. The Fading Light. Series 4 and V, 1963 to 1967. By 1963, the landscape around the Rapier had changed considerably. The Mini Cooper had arrived to define a new kind of affordable performance. Roots itself had launched the Hillman Imp. The motorsport effort that had fueled the Rapier's reputation was being redirected toward those newer, more technically fashionable projects. The Sunbeam Tiger, a Rapier-based car with a Ford Vate crammed under the bonnet, was capturing the imagination of those who wanted something more exotic. The Series 4 arrived in October 1963 with a substantial cosmetic overhaul, a new, more angular bodywork treatment, and different trim details that brought the car visually in line with the fashions of the early 1960s. Mechanically, it retained the 1,592 cubic centimeter engine from the Series 3 EA. 9,700 units were produced, a significant drop from Series 3 IA figures, reflecting the increasingly competitive market rather than any fundamental fault with the car itself. The Series V, introduced in 1965, brought the Rapier its largest engine yet, 1,725 cubic centimeters. In a new 5-bearing version of the familiar Roots unit, this more robust block produced 85 brake horsepower and pushed maximum speed to 95 miles per hour. The 0 to 60 time stood at 14.1 seconds. Despite being a genuinely better car in engineering terms than any of its predecessors, the Series V failed to find buyers. By the time production ended in June 1967, just 3,759 had been built, the rarest of all the series Rapiers. The market had moved on. The car that arrived at Earl's Court in 1955 as something fresh and contemporary had, by 1967, simply been outrun by time. Adding the verified production totals across all 6 series 7,477, plus 15,151, plus 15,368, plus 17,354, plus 9,700, plus 3,759 produces a grand total of approximately 68,800 units for the Audax-era Rapier. That is a serious production run by any standard of the period. Section 5. The question nobody asks: why does the MG get the glory? Here is the part that deserves an honest answer. The MGA, launched at the same 1955 Earl's Court show, became one of the great, iconic sports cars of the 20th century. Today, a well-preserved MGA commands strong money at auction and fills club car parks from California to Cambridgeshire. The Sunbeam Rapier, in average condition, is valued today at around £6,700, with the finest examples reaching £10,000 to £12,000. The most expensive Rapier ever sold at public auction achieved £23,063, a figure that would barely register as a footnote in MGA sales results. Why the disparity? It comes down to 3 things: purpose, mythology, and the kind of buyer each car attracted. The MGA was a pure sports car. 2 seats, no roof, wind in your hair, an engine note that carried an emotional charge even at moderate speeds. It was impractical by design, and that impracticality was precisely its appeal. You did not buy an MGA to drive your wife to the shops on a rainy Tuesday. You bought it to feel alive on a Saturday morning with the road to yourself. That kind of car breeds a passionate ownership culture. People remember it, the way they remember a first love. The Rapier was a different proposition entirely. 4 seats, a proper hardtop with weather protection, a boot large enough to be useful, overdrive to keep the revs down on long motorway runs. It was sporty, genuinely so. The rally results prove that beyond any reasonable argument, but it wore its sportiness within the framework of practicality. A man could use a Rapier every day, carry his family in it, take it to the continent, and still enjoy the occasional spirited drive with real confidence. That versatility was a strength in the showroom and a weakness in the mythology. Practical cars do not generate the same nostalgic pull. They get used, they get worn out, they get replaced without ceremony. Sports cars get cherished, restored, and written about for decades. The Rapier paid the price of being genuinely useful. There is also the matter of the Roots Group's trajectory. By the mid-1960s, Chrysler's growing stake in Roots was draining the company's resources and focus. The competition program wound down. The dealer network contracted. By the time the Rapier's successor, the Arrow-based Fastback, arrived in October 1967, the brand was already in a different phase entirely. The Fastback Rapier, built at Ryton-on-Dunsmore until 1969, and thereafter at Linwood in Scotland, went on to produce another 46,204 units, including the H120 and Alpine variants, continuing until 1976. But that is a different story for another day. What the series Rapier left behind was a record that should command more respect than it typically receives: 5 Monte Carlo top 5 finishes, an outright rack rally victory, class wins across 2 continents, and more than 68,000 satisfied owners who wanted something with a bit more character than the average family saloon, and the good sense to choose a car that delivered it. The Sunbeam Rapier was never going to win the mythology contest. It was not built for mythology. It was built for people who wanted to drive something genuinely good every day, something stylish, capable, and a little bit special without requiring either a racing driver's temperament or a barrister's income. The men and women who bought them between 1955 and 1967 made a thoroughly sensible, thoroughly satisfying choice. They had a car that could hold its own in serious international rallying on a Friday and take the family to the Lake District on Sunday. That is not nothing. In fact, by most measures that matter in the real world of motoring, that is quite a lot. The MGA will always get more attention. That is simply how automotive history works. The romantic story outlasts the practical one, every time. But the Rapier's record stands on its own terms, quietly, accurately, and without apology. If you have a story about the Sunbeam Rapier, whether you owned one, drove one, worked on one, or simply knew somebody whose Rapier was the most reliable thing they ever put petrol into, I genuinely want to hear it. Leave a comment below. These cars have been underrepresented in the conversation for too long, and the people who knew them personally are exactly the ones who should be talking about them. If this kind of careful, unhurried look at the car's history tends to forget is the sort of thing you want more of, please subscribe and hit the bell. We work hard to get the details right, because we know you know when they are wrong. Thank you for watching. You clearly have excellent taste in cars and in how you spend your time.